Hello and welcome to Move the Line, presented by 4for4 Bets. I'm Ryan Noonan, back here to talk about more NFL draft nonsense. It is that time of year. Moving the Line will continue to be your home for all things NFL draft, specifically NFL draft betting. After the draft cycle, we're going to get into all the other offseason nuggets, coaching changes, futures markets, much, much more. We're going to continue to be here at least once per week leading up to the week one kickoff of the 2024 season. Take a second, subscribe to the show wherever you are taking this in. If you're hanging out with us now on YouTube, which is probably the best way to do it, we'll continue to share a lot of mock drafts, our own. I'll share mine a little bit today, and then some other stuff continuously. So YouTube's probably your best bet. Subscribe to the 4for4 Bets YouTube channel. You prefer podcasts, we'll try to make it as podcast friendly as possible. Spotify, Apple, wherever you consume podcasts, go ahead and subscribe there as well. Joining me here, as always, fresh off of some Combine shenanigans, which we'll get on here early in the show. Connor Allen, what's going on?
Yeah, not a whole lot. I had a fun time at the Combine for the most part. Overall, it was cool atmosphere. It was just very surreal, seeing all these famous people and like players are walking around everywhere. You're just casually having a little lunch, and Penix and Bo Nix walk by, and then Caleb Williams is just sitting there. Like, it's very, very surreal experience. But one in unbelievable amount of Combine props thanks to Thor, Froton, Debro, a couple other people there. I mean, just insane information market basically. So shout out to them, and it was a great weekend.
Absolutely love it. Our third chair for the NFL draft season again this year. One of the best mock drafters in the space. Our friend here who also contributes MMA content, plugged in, busy guy. I mean, Scott's working, doing MMA, he's training MMA fighters and grinding mock draft news and visits. Scott Smith, what's going on?
Nothing much, man. Went to the doc today, got a little cortisone in the knee. So, another month I might be able to run this 40. But look, it's Combine season, a lot of news and everything getting pumped out. I'll be in Vegas a couple of weeks for one of the UFC fights. And hopefully by then we'll have some more lines out. Maybe I can get some live bets in there for NFL draft. So it'll be interesting to see. But look, a lot of stuff's coming out in the Combine. I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, we're going to have a fourth here soon. More news on that shortly. You maybe 3 next week because I'm out of pocket a little bit. So we'll figure out what that looks like. But, I'm going to add to the space a familiar draft name that you're familiar with that I think is going to be able to add some market value and help bounce some stuff off of the rest of the gentlemen here on the show. So I think it's going to be a great place to be. So don't forget to subscribe. Check it out. You can head over to 4for4.com right now. Find my mock draft just released this morning. Again, you can also click on the betting tab. You're going to want to get a betting subscription. You want to get in the Discord, get yourself set for 2024 football stuff. Anything in the football speculation space, you're going to start playing, season-long stuff. You're going to be doing, best ball drafts. You want to get in our betting sub, get in our Discord, and get everything that we have to offer at 4for4. Check that out, 4for4.com/plans. All right, Connor, I'm going to kick it to you. You believe you've been done dirty by a fellow Combine attendee with a large platform and podcast who told a story that did not shine the best light on you. So I'm going to give you the floor to start the show. Scott has not heard the story at all. I have heard the story, but I'm going to give it to you and let you kind of, you can speak your truth on it.
Yeah, no, I've already gotten some messages about it, and I was planning on telling it on the show anyway, so it's not a big deal in terms of being out in public. But obviously, had been a pretty long day of drinking at this point. But there's a bar/restaurant called Prime 47 that most people go to like after hours. So it's like literally like a steakhouse. Like Jerry Jones is just eating there casually, and then after like midnight, they close the shutters and they close the blinds and then like take out all the tables, and everyone's just like sitting there or hanging out and like, having a good time. So it's like very, very, random groups of people that are just talking, hanging out, chatting. That's where you hear a lot of the Combine rumors. So that's the place to be. But basically what happened was, so, it was like 2 a.m. by this point, maybe 2:30. Honestly, I don't really remember that. Chris Allen, great dude, works for Fantasy Life, comes up to me and is like, hey man, like I'm going to go up to Steve Smith and ask for a picture. Like, I don't think I've seen probably like 50 people at this point that are like, I would say very famous in the football space. We have not asked for a single picture for anyone. So I think Chris at this point was like, hey, I want to go ask for Steve Smith's picture. So I'm like, okay, cool. He hands me his phone. So I'm like, all right. So then Chris walks over there. And so if someone asks you to take a picture, I'd like start following, but like kind of behind. So I'm like 15 feet behind him, right? He comes over and he's like talking to Steve Smith. I can't see what he's saying. So I'm like there and I like take a picture. And Steve Smith looks up like after they were talking for like 10 seconds and he looks at me and he's like, what the, and I guess I can cuss on our show, but he's like, what the fuck are you doing? And I'm like looking around kind of like me, like I'm just taking a picture. Like, you know, he told me to take a picture. He's like, I didn't say you could take a fucking picture of me. And I'm like, whoa, what? I'm like, all right, man. Like, you know, and Dalton Cates is standing right there. He's like, yo, we just wanted a group picture, you know, like, and he's like, you cannot have a group picture. And we're like, all right, man. So I'm like, all right, you know, I walk at this point. I'm like, sorry, man. I walk away. And so like the way it's structured, there's like a couple of pillars and there's like the bar is right there. So I start walking towards the bar and then like I like look back and I see Steve Smith like walking towards the door and the bar, like looking around, like he's like looking for me, like you're like. I was like so shook. I'm like, holy shit. So I'm like hide back behind the pillar and I'm like, whoa, like I do not want these hands right now. It's 2 a.m. I am unreal drunk. And I was like, I do not need to be in a fist fight with Steve Smith over a picture that someone else asked me to take. I was like, that is just so ridiculous. So anyways, the version that was heard on another podcast that has significantly more followers made me look way worse. Like I was asked to take the picture. I was not creepily taking random pictures of Steve Smith. I said what's up to him earlier in the night. Like we had like a casual 10-second interaction prior to that. So it was not like that weird, but he was very mad. Like he was not joking. Like, what are you doing? He was legitimately very mad. So, don't know if he'd be consuming adult beverages. Don't know if there's some other factors in play with who he was sitting next to at the time. But it was wild. I was not the experience that I was looking for in that instance, but it was fun. It's a good story, and I mean, maybe getting in a fight with Steve Smith would have been an even better story. But I mean, I would just, you know, that we know how that would have gone. That would have been, I would have been looking a little rough for the show, I think.
So what you're saying is you didn't actually hide from Steve Smith. You believe the betrayal was that you had basically been sold out, that you had been hiding. Your boy did you dirty by saying you were hiding behind a pole.
Yeah, well, no. Okay, so he said he didn't even include the part where he was like, oh, like Connor was asked to take a picture. He thought I was just like with my own phone, like, oh, like that's cool, you know, like taking random pictures of Chris and Steve Smith, you know, like that was not the case. Like, you know, there was hundreds of other people there that were more famous than Steve Smith that I could have taken pictures of. And so that was part one. Part two was, it made me look like I was like running away and hiding, which I certainly was not looking for interaction. I'll say that. Like there was conveniently a pole right there that I was not in his direct line of sight, but I was not like, you know, like sitting there, like hiding. So anyways, it was a fun time. It was a fun story. And, I was just waiting. I think like, you know how after you drink, you get like the Sunday scaries and you like get like the worst anxiety about what happened the weekend before. I've never had such bad Sunday scaries, like refreshing my Twitter feed, just waiting for him or someone to cancel me or, you know, like just come at me over something. I was like, oh God, this is the worst. But we survived. We're at the other end, can laugh about it. I'm sure Steve still doesn't think it's funny, but yeah, we'll see.
Scott, you're going to have to train Connor. Make sure he's ready to go to Combine next year, just in case, you know, any hands get thrown his way.
If Jake Paul can fight Mike Tyson, I mean, I can fight anyone. I mean, Jesus, this is...
I mean,
get Paulson to go with you. He's like 6'8", huh?
Yeah, need to bring in... That's the thing is we had, you know, Silva was with us, you know, quote, with us, but never came out with us. So, you know, if we had Silva rolling with us, maybe we wouldn't have been confronted by a little, you know, 5'8" short king, but who knows?
No. Don't be the tough guy behind the microphone now. In hindsight, don't take swings while you're, you know.
I can do whatever I want. This is fun. This is how this works, right?
Oh man. So what about some other takeaways? Obviously, there's some you know, winners and losers coming out of the combine. Scott, I'll let you. I know you got your hands in the dirt here in terms of, you know, players that have helped themselves. Some guys didn't compete because of, you know, medical stuff and they're waiting for pro days. You know, what are some of the early takeaways? I know you've been grinding some of this stuff. There's an edge that you feel like people aren't really always accounting for these team visits. Who's actually meeting with who while they're there, on top of just the actual, you know, shorts and t-shirt Olympics, I guess.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, obviously, Xavier Worthy kind of stole the show with the 40 time that he ran. There's some questions as to whether that's going to project him and boost him into the first round. The number that I've kind of heard thrown around is, you know, like 10 move him up 10 spots. Is that going to put him into the first round? And it's possible that it could, because you did have some other guys like Keon Coleman. I don't think he had the greatest combine with some of the numbers that he put up and whatnot. And then there's also his other teammate Mitchell out of Texas, who also did have a good combine, good showing that could be in the first round. So I think when you start looking at some of that, specifically with Xavier Worthy, while the 40 time was great, he's still a bit undersized as far as like height and weight. So those are some things that are going to have to be taken into consideration. But, that 40 time could push him there, within that last 5 or so picks, and, maybe the first 5 in the second round. So he's one of the guys. The other guy that I think really solidified himself is Brian Thomas. Talked about it a little bit going into the draft, but he ran a 4.33 at 6'3", 210 pounds or whatever he weighed in at. And, his production there at LSU was a little bit overshadowed by Malik Neighbors, but by all means, some people think that he has a higher ceiling than what Neighbors might have here at the next level. So I think he solidified himself, and I think you can start looking at him as early as 15 or so, with some of the teams and what they need there. So those are two guys that I think really kind of moved their stock up. Worthy could boost himself into the first round. I think Thomas, solidified himself as that 4th wide receiver in this draft, going up, maybe another 5 to 8 slots of where he was projected at. But specifically, we talked about some of the meetings and combine interviews, and I think it's an underutilized tool when projecting, where teams are going to land. Not every team drafts off of players that they visit with at the combine, but what some of these meetings can do, you can start to look at teams and see, what type of players they're looking at, what positional groups they're looking at. If they're trying to decide between two, you may have 2 players that fit your scheme that test very similarly, and it may be something that happens in that interview room that's the deciding factor. But the other thing is, and I'll mention 2 players that a lot of teams met with. And the first one is a guy that's kind of teetering right outside the first round, and it's going to be the defensive end out of Washington, Braylon Trice. I counted like 12 teams that he had meetings with. So he was a very popular player amongst some other teams, amongst some other guys. And then the other one is the defensive tackle, who also tested well. And that's the one out of Florida State. I think his last name's Fisk. He met with a bunch of teams. Braden Fisk is a guy who, a lot of teams met with. So a lot of teams are showing interest in him. He tested very well amongst all the defensive tackles. So those are 2 guys that I think you'll start to see. I don't know that Fisk will go ahead and break into the first round, but I think he's a guy that'll start to get consideration, and you'll start to hear that he's moving up. Braylon Trice, on the other hand, he's a guy that I think could, move into the first round. I had him in my first round mock there to Detroit. I think he fits that scheme and what they want to do. And, he's a guy who hustles and he's put up the numbers there in Washington. So I think he's a guy that interests me. And based upon, a lot of the combine interviews and stuff that he had, he's a guy that I think that you can see break into the first round.
I think that's an interesting note. Maybe a little bit of, maybe I'm, just making too much of this too. But I also think when you think of those guys, because they are probably fringe back half or back end first round guys, early second round guys. You also can just think about that like shift that we have from day 1 to day 2, where there's just that downtime. Teams reassess what happened. They take a look at the board, and maybe there's some teams that can be looking to attack early in day 2, maybe jockeying position where they're at to be able to target, again, some of these defensive linemen, some of these pass rushers that maybe make sense as a team need, but maybe not necessarily where they're currently slotted in the draft. So that could be a thing there too. So very interesting. Yeah, Scott will continue to grind that, and I do think that it's proofs in the pudding, man. Scott has been really good at final mock drafts for a number of years, and finding some edges where people are looking, I think, is a reason for that success. So we'll continue to benefit from more of that information. Connor, good question in the chat from our friend Jeff. Curious about your bench press reps at the combine if you were to go there today. So 2 1/4. Man, I don't know. I don't think you're putting up many. You're muted, so you got a second to capture that.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I don't bench press. Like, I just started lifting like a couple weeks ago again for the first time. That was not really my strength.
Over under half rep.
Yeah, it's good over under. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I just have no idea. Like, I've been doing a lot of push-ups lately. That's been good.
Yeah, it's good.
Which could correlate, but I mean, I'm about as thick as the bar, so or as more than as like as a rep. So if that translates at all, then maybe. But yeah, not a whole lot there. So
Yeah, I don't know. I would not your strong suit though. I know confidently we'd crush Daigle in the 40, for sure. So
I love we're just gonna get chirped at. We're gonna bring it up every show, and then I think were we at the combine and he was tweeting at me, I was already just wasted, so it's not good. I was sending you some bunch of Slack messages. I don't even know if they were comprehensible. Not good.
I wouldn't.
You caught me at a bad time. So
is that 40 with or without Steve Smith chasing you?
Oh boy,
that's a good question. Not a marathon. Daigle thinks it's a marathon. It's just 40, man. 40. We'd be able to take it. So
I would absolutely be smoked in a marathon. I did want to add too, though, real quick about the wideouts. I think Scott did a great job summarizing it. Like, I think another guy too is Ladd McConkey, who could sneak into the first round. I mean, he was expected to be a 4.5s guy. He ran a 4.39. He was like, I think the thoughts about him was more of like a well-polished receiver who maybe is athletic and can do some things. He is a legit athletic. Like, I mean, he was like an 8.3 RAS, like, ran in the 4.3s. I mean, that's like really impressive. So I would not be surprised if someone takes a stab on him at the end, Xavier Worthy. Like, there could legit be 7 wideouts, I think, in the first round. And that's not including Keon Coleman. So I don't know, something worth noting. But yeah, let me bring up your mock here.
Yeah, I think there's a few there at the back end. Everyone wants to put a wide receiver to the Chiefs at 32. Could be a number of those. I think Pearsall out of Florida is another name that I think really impressed and did some help for himself there. You can see I have a wide receiver that we haven't really featured yet, 32nd to the Chiefs there too. But I think we're obviously going to start at the top. I mean, Caleb, look, I think what's interesting coming out of the combine is that we just didn't hear really anyone or any rumors or even anything really that sounded like not Caleb. So like, I feel like, again, it's not a bettable price at this point for Caleb at 1, but just, you didn't really hear anyone that's, making a spot for not to be Caleb or any Justin Fields stuff or anything like that. So Caleb feels increasingly safe at number 1. We're going to continue to maybe disagree a little bit at 2 and 3. You guys are very strong, increasingly strong. Have made the case here on the show and are close to wanting to maybe bet on Drake May to be number 2. I feel like there's some good. And again, like Scott called me out, hey, it's maybe Lion season a little bit. That's probably fair. It definitely is silly season. But I do think that there was more conversations around some people feeling like Jayden Daniels had, out of the 3 quarterbacks, he by far has the best 2023 tape of the class. And it kind of ascended, and people think, hey, it's maybe they're in their own tier where there's been a little bit more Drake May hate a little bit. So I have Daniels 2 to Washington here, Drake May 3. I think the wish casting call out is fair as a Patriots fan who wants Drake May to land there. But I also think there's a little bit there as well. Scott, am I just buying into the McShays of the world? Some of the other athletic staff that's also talking about Daniels going 2 and May falling to 3.
Look, one of the things that did come out of the combine was that Jayden Daniels left on Saturday, and he was not available, whereas you had Drake May actually on the sidelines cheering on some teammates that were doing drills and stuff. And so some of the look and some of the just non-participation has rubbed some people. And I would generally say that it's probably front office execs that have been in the NFL for a long time and have been, going to the combine and dealing with those things. I don't think the NIL era that's come in and had a lot of these players blowing off the combine is doing, them any favors here with some of the front office execs. My pushback on Jayden Daniels at 2 is essentially that, everybody's going to make out what he did, here at LSU this year. And he looked phenomenal. There's no takeaway with that, but there's some stats that come out and the scouting is that he's a 1-read quarterback. And if that first read's not there, he's taken off and going. And, there's been a lot of that, what he does on the run is elite, and I think he's a little bit further ahead than what Lamar Jackson was as a passer. The issue is when you start to look at that heat map with Jayden Daniels is that it's all deep and it's over the middle. There's not a lot of success outside the numbers to the sideline. And I think you've seen some NFL some quarterbacks go into the NFL that had similar heat maps tend to struggle. With Drake May, I talked about some of the connections with Phil Longo, there at North Carolina, who's now at Wisconsin, who coached both Drake May and Sam Howell, big connections with Cliff Kingsbury. I just think that the connection is there. And one of the other rumors that I heard that was strong was that Peters loves Drake May. I think Washington's number one choice is if they could get up and get Caleb Williams some kind of way, that would be their number one choice. But, looking at things from some of the stuff that I've heard is that Drake May is the player that they're zeroing in on it too.
Connor, anything to add to the Daniels May discussion 2-3?
Yeah, I think what you were hearing was like Rich Eisen came out and was like Jaden Daniels the number 2 quarterback. The Athletic piece that came out was like 5 of 6 GMs had Jaden Daniels the number 2 quarterback. So I think I'm not like sold that it's May. I don't think it quite as much as Scott, but I am more confident than the market right now. I mean, we're seeing -115s for May. I'd probably have it closer to like -160 at this point for May. I think Scott's probably closer to the -200 range, it seems like, based on our conversation. So, and that's fair. Like, I think last time we spoke, I was kind of like a coin flip, which was not reflective of the market. Again, May was in that 160, 170, 180 range. And I think I've kind of since bounced back here because I think the same conversation happens with the Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze thing. It's some teams will have Malik Neighbors wide receiver 1. Some teams will have Jaden Daniels quarterback 2. But the only team that matters is the Washington Commanders and the Arizona Cardinals for those respective positions. And everything that we're hearing so far is that, well, a lot of teams like that, but like it was in the Athletic article too. It was like Adam Peters prefers, really likes Drake May. And so obviously we need more than that to fire on a bet, but like kind of the same thing with the Cardinals. I've heard now from like 2 public sources and 2 private sources that they love Marvin Harrison Jr. So, I mean, again, it's one of those things where it's more important about the team, not just like collectively of who would draft who, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the Marvin Harrison stuff, like he handled the combine, I get like an alpha, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's what he is. Just like, look, I'm not wasting my time trying to get ready for these, these nonsense drills that don't help me ball. I'm going to continue to, work on that. I put the tape up. You know who my daddy is. Like, you know where to find me. And I think the Neighbors over Marvin Harrison stuff is it's just too cute. Like, it's just, I don't see it at all. And I think there's some, more people too that also like Odunze as much, if not more, than Neighbors too. And I think that's probably closer than anything in terms of people getting to Marvin Harrison. The Chargers are really tough at 5. I took the easy way out on alt. You could sell me on another offensive lineman. I also believe that they would love to trade out of that, continue to, add an offensive lineman down the board and add some more picks. They are in probably the worst, maybe competitively with the Saints, who just are annually in a tough salary cap situation. The Chargers are in a really tough salary cap spot for a new kind of management group to take over and run that. So giving themselves, more cost control players for a longer period of time is probably a great way to do it, especially if they don't see a massive difference between, say, Alt and some of the other offensive tackles. And I think that's kind of been the case that I've been making the whole time is, look, I mean, Alt's a massive human being and went out and put out like an insane combine to run like basically 5 flat at 6'9", 325 or whatever. Like, there's some impressive combine showings here this week, and Alt is definitely one of those. So yeah, Chargers are really tough. I went 7. I'll let you guys ask questions because it's kind of typically my job to you guys when you guys mock. So I don't have to just talk and run through my mock, but I went Odunze at 7, which I know we've kind of talked back and forth about. Like, I really want to put him over Neighbors. I think he might be better. I think he's going to be better in year 1 to come in into an offensive system. I think my angle here was, look, Bill Callahan is the offensive line guru. It's a case I kind of made earlier. I think they can take some other shots later, have the coach kind of coach up the young guys. They need a ton of playmakers. They have a second-year quarterback who struggled, who needs some playmakers as well. So to be able to get a shot at one of these elite guys, they should probably do that, in my opinion. So, but I'll give you guys the floor. Anything that you want to add, any questions you want to ask, or any thoughts on anything on the mock?
The Joe Alt stuff is interesting. I've heard, that I think they're probably the most likely team to trade down right now. Like the team, if there's one team that I had to say like 75% plus they're trading down. I think that teams could trade up for JJ McCarthy into that range. I heard that the Chicago Bears would be interested in trading to 5 for potentially one of the wideouts. Like both of those are very much in range outcomes. I mean, even it would not surprise me at all, to be honest, for a variety of reasons. So I think that that's an interesting one too. Also, they want like a right tackle instead. Like they may not want like a left tackle. So like maybe Alt isn't the best fit for them. And there's this tackle class is so deep. So do you know what like number you ended up with offensive lineman? Did you say 7 in the first round? More? 8?
I didn't count it. I think there are 7 though.
Okay.
Yeah, at least.
It's just a crazy offensive line class. I mean, these guys are absolute freaks.
Yeah, it's finding the next group, I guess, would be tough in terms of like, I think there's a teardrop here, maybe a little bit. I guess maybe Jordan Morgan, or there's some interior offensive linemen that are shooting up when you look at like Daniel Jeremiah's top 50 that like are just outside of the first round. Zach Frazier from West Virginia, just outside the cut. He's like 35th in DJ's latest top 50. But yeah, I think there is a little bit of a teardrop in terms of kind of these guys that I have currently mocked here.
Talius Fuaga is also a right tackle. Someone had him in his mock directly at 5, and Daniel Jeremiah has him as his best offensive lineman right now. That right now is plus 750 at FanDuel, plus 650 at DraftKings. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I took a little desk pop, like a tiny little lunch money one, just because I thought that price is probably a little bit off. I still think that, Alt just like probably shouldn't be minus 200. That's what I would say. Like, I think he is probably the best offensive lineman, but I don't think he should be minus 200. And so I think Fuaga could be interesting there.
Yeah, I'd actually echo some of the same sentiments there with the Chargers. I've been hearing the same thing, that of the teams there in the top 5, they're the most likely to move out, specifically because philosophically, from a draft value standpoint, they would be taking one of these tackles to play right tackle, and that's just not where the value is at. You're looking at drafting wide receiver, quarterback, tackle, and edge there. So I don't know that the value for what they would want or to draft one of these tackles to play right tackle opposite of Slater is where the value is there for the Chargers there at 5. So I think they are definitely an option to move back with one of these teams that would be interested in JJ McCarthy, or one of these teams that want to come up and get one of these wide receivers. Looking there at 7, I actually like the move with Rome Odunze going there to Tennessee, and it's specifically because of the depth of the offensive tackles in this class. I think when you start looking at it and you have a direct tier with those top 3 guys, with Marvin Harrison being that alpha, there is some argument with Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze. Odunze, from what I understand, impressed everyone at the combine with his competitiveness. There's, some video and stories about him not being happy with his 3-cone time, and so he stayed after until he could get what he wanted. Teams were very impressed by that, from my understanding, just with his competitiveness. And that actually carries over to some of the stories from in the season when one of his teammates got hurt. They said he was the guy on that team that was the leader, that picked up the slack and got everybody to work harder and do those things. That's something that's going to resonate with front offices and in these combine interviews. And then, to go ahead and back that up with what happened at the combine. And on top of that, he still put up good numbers at the combine. It's not like it's just all an effort thing, all a personality thing. He has the production to go along with it. He measured out well. So when you start looking at it, you've got character, you've got performance, and you've got his athleticism and physical traits. I think that's going to go ahead and solidify him up into the standpoint. And I think when you're a team like the Titans, you start kind of adding up, if we go wide receiver and we go tackle, what order will we go? Can you get a guy that's going to be as good of a prospect as Rome Odunze in the second round? The answer is probably no. So I think there's a very good chance that either them or, even the Giants there at 6 could end up, taking Odunze and then addressing the offensive tackle with some of these deeper guys, whether it be, the offensive tackle from BYU or, the other one from Arizona there and early in the second round.
Yep.
Did you see that gainer too? The little backflip he did when he was running through the thing? That was pretty sick. Newton, did you put any thought to JJ McCarthy at 6 for the Giants?
A little bit. I kind of wrote about it a little bit. It just is. It's a really hard thing. It's a tough spot for the Giants. They're in a really very difficult spot to decide what do they need to do, because either way they need offensive difference makers for whatever they're doing there. So there's the discussion of like self-inflicted wound, because like they basically double down when they shouldn't have, just thinking like, hey, we made some late season wins, we make the playoffs, Daniel Jones is our guy. And like, he could have got away with, a 1-year deal. So they have so many needs. It's almost like the Patriots. Like that Patriots really, like, you hear and talk about the Pats, maybe trading down or getting out of 3 because they have so many needs as well. It's like, yeah, you do, but no one has the answer. It doesn't matter what you have if you don't have the answer at quarterback. So I think you got to stay there and get a playmaker, and you can get out of the Daniel Jones thing moving forward. They've seen enough from Daniel Jones where I think he can be like slightly below league average quarterback. That's not like elevating you, but like part of it is it's hard to evaluate when you can't stay on the field and stay healthy. So I did, but I didn't really consider it. Part of that is probably also my thoughts on JJ McCarthy not necessarily being that dude per se. But at that point, this doesn't matter. Like he's going in the top 10. He's definitely going, maybe earlier than we think, maybe approaching the top 5 here. But yeah, I think the right thing for the Giants to do is get some talent in the building, someone you can build around, kind of an anchor. You got a bunch of dudes at wide receiver, but no like the dude. So I think, having one of these guys, I think really, really helps. So I think I would go with Dunze over Neighbors personally. I get why there's the Neighbors infatuation because he's bigger and more explosive. I just think that the more I've watched of a Dunze, and again, I'm watching YouTube clips and cut-ups. I'm not watching, all 22 and know what I need to be watching specifically. But I like what I see from Dunze translating to the NFL and probably hitting the ground running a little bit faster than even Neighbors does. So yeah, I think wide receiver is the right way for the Giants.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's an issue though that I just keep hearing, like Giants quarterback, like Eisen came out and was like, they're done. That was like his number one combine rumor. It was like, they're done with Daniel Jones. And then I heard from a much more, reputable Giants reporter, basically like, he wasn't saying it, but it was kind of like hinting consistently like, hey, they're, in the quarterback market, they're going to add a quarterback. Like there's, like it was a pretty consistent, echo there for the entire time. So I don't know. Maybe it's not McCarthy, but those rumors continue to fly. They're in a good position to get him at 6. If they don't think that they can stay there at 6, maybe they trade up to 5. If for some reason the Cardinals are fine with trading back from 4 to 6, maybe they trade up to 4, which we've heard, QB 1 through 4. That was Diana Rossini said that in her podcast. She was talking to another GM. Like, it wouldn't surprise me. I could also see JJ McCarthy being like semi-Will Levis. Literally having all this steam to be a top 5 guy and then falling, maybe not the second round, but like, 15, 20, who knows? So I don't know. I think there's a couple of different interesting points there specifically because you had him at 9 to the Broncos. And we talked about it last week and Scott said it too. It's like the Broncos really going to go into the next season with Sean Payton with just Jarrett Stidham at quarterback. Now there are rumors about them adding Sam Darnold as depth. Like that's what our boy Albright has been talking about. Like, Scott, you have any thoughts on this Broncos situation? Because I feel like it's just getting messier and messier and uglier, and they just cut Justin Simmons. This is a disaster.
Yeah, it's been a disaster for a few teams. You start looking at Von Miller in Buffalo and all the players that Buffalo's cleaning house with as well. So, yeah. Like I said, I think the Broncos are in a tough spot. Some people are talking about this Russell Wilson deal maybe being the worst trade in history outside of Herschel Walker. So it's a tough spot, and I don't see them. I know what Sean Payton was used to down here in New Orleans with Drew Brees. I think a big part of the reason why he left was because Drew Brees was leaving and he didn't like the quarterback situation that was following him. He inherited the Russell Wilson situation. JJ McCarthy, there's still a lot of question marks about his profile as a quarterback with a small amount, throwing the ball like 15 times a game there in Michigan, and some of the development he may have to do to go ahead and be successful at the next level. It's a tough situation. I don't know if trading up, is going to be in the cards for them to get JJ McCarthy. Going from 12 to 9 in this scenario is not that big, but they're already short on draft capital as it is. So it's a situation, and I keep hearing Bo Nix connected to Denver. I think Bo Nix fits with some of the stuff that Sean Payton wants to do. I'm not saying that it's going to happen here at 12, and I'm not saying that it's positively going to happen at all. But I think the market's at 340 with Bo Nix being drafted by Denver. Whether it be a trade down scenario or whether it be early in the second round, I think that's the name that I keep hearing they're connected to Denver. I think Denver would desperately want to move up. But I think if they're going to do so, it's going to be to get one of these top 3 guys, not necessarily JJ McCarthy.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the Bo Nix thing, like that's how wild some of these, the quarterback position in particular can be. Like you can have a guy that could definitely be top 12 because that's where the Broncos' actual pick is currently. I made a trade here. Or you can have a guy that's definitely not in the first round. Like that's just quarterback is just an entirely separate beast. Michael Penix also had a good combine. Medicals came back good. There's the arm talent is never a question. That I think went well for him. Does that mean look, he's got 7 weeks? Like the drumbeat for Nix and Penix as they meet, as they do pro days, as they do some other stuff. Like I'm not against the thought of like that happening where we get one of those two and we get a 5th quarterback in the back end of the first round. I think it's definitely possible. This current mock draft is a really tough scene for the Vikings because like they are really stuck. And that makes sense. It's kind of why I had it is like, look, Denver can't sit at 12 and get McCarthy. If they really do like McCarthy, and we have heard a little bit of that, like Peyton likes him. If they do have him, in a tier above Nix or Penix, probably Nix, they would more than likely have to jockey in front of the Vikings minimally to make that happen. To Connor's point, they might have to do that and get in front of the Giants at 6. So like, that's definitely a thing that is a moving target there, which is tough because they don't have an answer. I basically am thinking I put Dallas Turner to Atlanta because I think that there's a chance Kurt's going to Atlanta, so they're off the market from a quarterback standpoint. And the Vikings are kind of left holding the bag. They have to make a free agent decision. Maybe they get into the Justin Fields market. Maybe they get into the Ryan Tannehill market. Who knows what that ends up looking like? But like kind of a tougher spot for them in the middle of their rebuild. In adding attack or an edge rusher, knowing that they might lose Daniel Hunter in free agency as well. So yeah, that's kind of a tough spot for the Vikings if they are left holding the bag at the most important position. So
yeah I think
go for it, Scott.
I think the Justin Fields thing is starting to make more and more sense. I think when you start to look at Minnesota and specifically their salary cap situation, you look at what Mike Evans just signed for there in Tampa Bay and what they're going to go ahead and have to sign Justin Jefferson to. You're talking about maybe $30 million a year for a wide receiver, which is crazy to think of in this day and age. But to go ahead and look toward the future for Justin Jefferson and then turn around and give Cousins another 40 to 45 million for next 2 years, that would put over a 75 to $80 million range of what they're paying for 2 players. And I just don't think that's possible. So I think you're definitely going to see Kirk Cousins signing somewhere else. I think the most heat has been with him going there to Atlanta. And I have started to hear the rumblings with Justin Fields being there, the quarterback. It would give them a year or two to go ahead and figure out, what they're going to do with Fields, if he would be the quarterback of the future and kind of be a bridge to make that decision as to where they're going to address it and not have to give up, more draft capital as far as like first round picks to move up to get one of these other guys that are still going to have the question marks, probably more than what Justin Fields would have.
I'm feeling pretty good that Kirk Cousins is going to be the Falcons quarterback next year. I mean, everything that I heard was that Cousins was going to test the open market, like Scott said. But, there was already people reporting that he could be interested in the Falcons. There's some, I guess, schematic similarities that, kind of make sense in some ways. They have Drake London. They have Kyle Pitts. I mean, what I heard was like they want to pass the ball way more. They don't want to do what they were just doing. And so, I don't know. Like, I think that changes the dynamic a lot. Like, that changes the Falcons' whole draft strategy there at 8. I mean, they can, now comfortably take the best player available, I think, in a variety of ways. The Vikings, I think, puts a lot of stress on them. I think the Vikings could be in play for Justin Fields. Yeah. We've seen them too. Like, they have this weird, Kevin O'Connell has this weird obsession with like randomly mobile quarterbacks. Like, he tried the whole, what's his name? The space guy, astronaut. Tried Josh Dobbs for a little bit. And then, they were rumored with like basically every mobile quarterback for a long time for the last few years. So that wouldn't be surprising to me at all. I truly don't really know where Justin Fields goes at this point. So maybe he winds up being Atlanta, but I think that there was like massive overconfidence there. He was minus 400 at one point to be a Falcon. And I think it probably is closer to the current odds specifically. So It's definitely something to watch for sure with Fields' landing spot. But I think that his value is just consistently falling at this point and more reflective of who he is as a player. Like, I mean, this is much more reflective of like reality, not just Bears fans' pipe dreams of who Justin Fields could be and, him scrambling around and randomly winning games from time to time just because he's a fun player. But I just don't think he's a consistent player, and a lot of the league doesn't value that.
And
a couple
just
things
of
there.
note,
Go ahead, Scott.
just of note, looking at the combine interviews, it's interesting. The Vikings did meet with the top 3 quarterbacks. I haven't been able to track down a combine meeting that they did with JJ McCarthy, but Bo Nix is another quarterback that they met with.
Okay. Yeah, so I think first of all, the Kirk to Atlanta stuff is like, they're basically a straight line, right? Like it was in Minnesota the last couple of years with Kevin O'Connell, who came from the coaching staff of Sean McVay. The new offensive coordinator and play caller in Atlanta under Raheem Morris is Zach Robinson, who just came from the Rams and Sean McVay.
Right.
So like it is sliding into a system that like Kirk speaks that language instantaneously. That's a no-brainer. And Fields is kind of tied, and the Bears are in a spot where like right now what they're getting from an offering standpoint, like not what they expected, maybe not great, like not super surprising to maybe what we thought. But that all changes as soon as Kirk goes first. And Kirk goes first. Fields doesn't go first. When we get the answer to Kirk, those teams that are still left in the market all of a sudden go, well, we can't miss on Fields. So if there's a team that actually is thinking about Fields, like Minnesota, they're probably willing to pay closer. There's no first rounds involved here, but they may be willing to pay for some of the earlier stuff. Maybe a second round pick, maybe some of that conditional third next year, whatever that looks like, that they are not getting right now, maybe can get once Kirk is off the market first.
Yeah. So non mock draft note, I bet Drake London Offensive Player of the Year at 150 to 1 yesterday.
Yeah, I don't hate that.
I mean, it's going to be 50 to 1 when they get Kirk Cousins. It'll be in the same range that AJ Brown, Olave, like that kind of stuff were last year heading into the season. So, definitely could do worse. It's a long shot. I think it's like 125 to 1 now, 100 to 1. I mean, whatever. Throw a couple bucks. You never know.
Yeah. Look at that division. We know is wide open, right? Like, it seemed like no one wanted it at the tail end of the year. Like, we definitely didn't think it was going to be the Bucks at the start of the season. And yeah, that division is different instantly with Kirk there in Atlanta. So Bears with Brock Bowers at 12. It seems increasingly to me that the Bears can't sit at 9 and have Neighbors or Odunze fall in their lap. It just doesn't seem like that's going to happen. And look, Bears offensive line's really not that bad. They had a ton of injuries last year and just weren't really able to have their 5 starters, but I feel like they're okay. Like, that doesn't mean that they can't address the position, but it doesn't feel like a glaring need. I think more of the need that they probably have is on, they could add some defensive guys, another edge rusher or something like that, or cornerback talent to pair with Jalen Johnson. They need to get more talent, pass catching talent for Caleb Williams. And look, yes, Brock Bowers is a tight end by position. And yes, they have Cole Kmet on the team. But like, you'd be so dumb to pass on Brock Bowers simply because you have Cole Kmet. If you don't think Brock Bowers is the dude, that's different. You're probably also wrong. But you just can't not make the play because you already have someone at the position. It just makes no sense. Again, like, we can't really talk about it anymore, but like, the Patriots a decade or so ago had a pretty nice offense when they went back-to-back tight end in the draft, and both of them ended up being pretty awesome. One of them ended up being a serial killer. The other one ended up being probably the best tight end ever. But man, those 2 years with Hernandez and Gronk together, that team was awesome. And I know like Cole Kmet's not that dude. He's not one of those dudes, but like, Bowers is a slot receiver. He's just like, he's better than just an inline blocking tight end. So Bowers would be really interesting to me. Connor, what are your thoughts?
So, so who's the serial killer? Is Kmet the serial killer or is Bowers?
Yeah, that's
it's not that touchy. It's all right. No, I think it makes sense. I think also Brian Thomas Jr. We have a comment here, Brian Thomas bust. Maybe, but if you're trading down, I think the Bears are almost certainly trading up or trading down. I'd be pretty surprised if they stand pat and take like a tackle or something like that. They don't really need an edge. I mean, you can always use more edge, but like,
Sure.
there's way bigger needs, I think. So I think they either trade up and they get one of those 3 guys, or they trade down and get a Bowers or a Brian Thomas Jr. who ran in the 4.3s. Again, his time was lined in the 4.45s. His projected 40 was like mid 4.4s, and he just blazed. So I mean, he'd add more to the offense immediately, and I think it'd be a fun team. And if they trade down, recoup some of their draft capital, which they just traded another mid-round pick away for the guy from the Bills. It was Ryan Bates, I believe, like an interior offensive lineman. And so, I mean, I don't think they have a single pick after like the 4th round. Like they just like, at this point, they have just a couple of top picks and then, nothing. So it wouldn't be surprising to see them trade down a couple of times. Maybe it's the 2nd round, maybe it's, later than that. But yeah. I think this 9 pick, they're either moving one way or the other.
Yeah, I agree. I can see him moving up, like you said, to maybe lock in one of those receivers to put opposite DJ Moore. But yeah, I mean, Bowers is tough. We talked about Scott last week. When we were going through your mock too. Like Bowers just really, none of us think he should fall out of the top 10 from just like a blind resume standpoint. But he's also just really hard to find a home. And I think that was some of the stuff we got out of the combine too. Is just teams have a hard time kind of finding out where he goes. I was tossing to you, Scott, but you don't have to add anything to it.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is with Brock Bowers. I don't think anybody's, knocking him as far as the prospect that he is. It's just, a positional value issue. And then, what priorities like teams needs. You saw Washington go ahead and sign a tight end, and Zach Ertz here recently. And I think there's a few other guys there on the market that some teams are going to look at. So I don't necessarily know that tight end is going to be, that big of a priority. But, as far as Chicago, if they move down here and add another piece, and let's talk like Cole Kmet, he came to the team in 2020. So, another year or two, he's going to be gone. So it could be a seamless transition from Kmet to Bowers as a primary weapon.
Yeah, it'd be nice. I mean, man, that offense changes pretty quickly. That offensive line could stay healthy. It was one of the best run blocking lines in the league the last 2 years. Struggled, young guys up front. But again, just part of it was just the continuity issues. They had so many injuries. Just, Jones was out, and like the interior guys right away. Tevin Jenkins was out to start the year for a while. They didn't have all 5 guys for very long, if at all. Though. So cornerbacks are really tough. Where I have Quentin Mitchell, the first corner off the board here. It's a need for the Colts. And look, Chris Ballard has been a traits guy more so than anything. Not that Terrion Arnold went and had a bad combine because he didn't, but Mitchell sure as hell popped. Great size, athleticism, agility, all those things. He had like I think a 9.8 something in RAS, which was I think Arnold was in the high 8s. So just that's kind of been a thing for Chris Ballard, and there are teams that end up being traits guys. And I think Ballard is that too, and it kind of fits a need. I could also see them being enamored, like Connor said, with Brian Thomas's, size speed combination there, adding a Alec Pierce upgrade opposite of Michael Pittman, and figuring out Josh Downs in the slot and whatever else you do. That could be something that makes sense too. You get into a lot of these spots here in the back end. I know you guys experienced it as well, where they have multiple needs for guys that are like positioned in this area. So you don't even have to reach when you're mocking. You could do that with like, Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, Miami, Philly. Like all these teams have a spot where you're like, oh, they can go offensive line and they can go corner. They can go edge or they can go offensive line. Like there's a bunch here that makes it really hard. To the point that Jeff had in the chat and the question, like, yeah, it'd be so much easier when we have the answers to the test post free agency, and that will shift all of this too. But again, like, yeah, these mocks will become more accurate. We'll have more information. This process does do kind of that and narrow down the couple of options that the teams have, which I think is interesting. And I think pairing that with some of the work that Scott's doing with what teams are doing in terms of meetings and visits and all that stuff, I think matters quite a bit here too. So yeah, I mean, I win Mitchell over Arnold. I think it's an interesting question. Nate Wiggins has like Emmanuel Forbes kind of vibes. I couldn't believe that Forbes was going to be a first round pick last year, weighing like $163 or whatever he weighed. Wiggins is not far behind that, but he also ran like a 4.29 or something. So like he's going to go in the first rounds with his like height too. He's like 6'2". So yeah, that's definitely happening. So yeah, the offensive lineman, it's a really tough back half of the draft where I feel like it's just a labor of trying to get the many guys that you think make sense that are going to go in the first round. So,
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, was there anyone that you left out that you felt like you needed to put in there? I guess Kool-Aid's an interesting guy. I think he's going to fall out of the first round now at this point after he's a Jones fracture, getting surgery. So like,
yeah,
I had him at 15, 16. I'm going to leave him out next time. Was that in consideration for you? Or
that was in consideration. The one thing that is there is that like it's definitely a need for the Lions, and the Lions could give two rips about what anyone thinks their big board's supposed to look like, or like they are. Whoever they evaluate is their guy. I think Kool-Aid's going to be good enough to go for pro day for Alabama, which will help him and probably keeps him in play for the back end. But you got to say that's the same thing with like Cooper DeJean. He's tough. Enos Rakestraw, the corner from Missouri, I left out. Like he's in that mix as well. There's some other guys that are kind of right in there at the like cornerback position that I think are kind of like tough, leaves. I mean, I went Xavier Worthy over AD Mitchell because I like the dude ran 4.21. Like someone's drafted him in the first round. But like that was kind of tough. But yeah, like I don't know. Like I was telling Scott before we got going here too. Like I probably wouldn't have had Johnny Newton to the Ravens if I was doing this again. But the Ravens always, no matter where they are in the first round, they get that guy that just shouldn't be there. It happens every year. Right? It's like, oh, there was all the stuff with like, Hamilton's going to fall. They get Hamilton and they make him a star. Like it just happens every year where they get a guy that shouldn't be around. So like Leo Latu is that guy for me. He has the best, I think probably the best tape, especially 2023 tape of any of the edge rushers. Some teams are going to have him completely off their board because he medically retired, before coming back and transferring because he had a neck injury. He as well had a nice little like medical report at the combine and things look good for him. So I think that probably helps him moving forward. But like, that's a guy that like fits a need for the Ravens. And I could see them just kind of sitting there and not, the Ravens just kind of backing into, an absolute elite edge rusher. Jeff wants to know Keon Coleman. You think he'd be a first rounder? Yeah. I mean, like Connor mentioned him, he's in that back end there. Like those receivers, maybe at 28 to 32, that could be in there. AD Mitchell's that guy. I really like Xavier Legette. I know he's like a senior breakout, late breakout, which is like a no-no in like the prospect profile space. He's just got some like AJ Brown, Deebo Samuel vibes when you watch him play. And that's a big dude who went out and like showed out at the combine. Whereas like some of these other speed guys feel more gadgety. Like the dude he's the third heaviest receiver at the combine at 221. Hit the third fastest 40 and had the second best vertical in the class. So like, I don't know. There's just a lot there that like, I don't know. I know that Brett Coleman had a nice piece on like some of the off the field stuff that he had in his life that have kind of been probably leading indicators as why maybe he was a late breakout, but that's a kid that seems like he's going to be a good football player. And I mean, Worthy makes a lot of sense for the Chiefs, but I just think he's probably gone before that, to be honest.
Yeah, Worthy replacing Gabe Davis would make a lot of sense. I mean, just having like kind of that field stretcher potential. That makes sense for sure. And then, I mean, we're looking at Coleman in the last like month is 47% of round one mocks. I expect that to dip a lot. Whereas like McConkey, Legette, all the like combine guys, Worthy, to all be included in the first round. So, again, I think Keon Coleman's fine, but for me, he's kind of more like that wide receiver 7, wide receiver 8 range now instead of like the wide receiver 5, 6 border.
Yeah. What gets interesting is when we get into like number of corners, because I think Kamari Lassiter is going to be increasingly in first round mocks as we move forward here. I have him 25th to the Packers. A lot of tape guys that I respect really like the tape and were worried they want to see what he did at the combine. And I think he showed that he does have some great fluidity and athleticism based off of what he did at the combine. He fits a need, I think, for, again, like the Packers are one of those teams where they can go corner or line or, edge. We've seen the Packers go Georgia Bulldog heavy in the last few years. I think that's a school where they're comfortable drafting and probably have some good connections there. Basically, they had 2 guys with with Wyatt and Quay Walker a couple years ago in the first round. So I think Lassiter is made a way into the first round, and I think probably ahead of Kool-Aid, who's still dealing with that foot injury. So he's also a dog in the run game, and I always have a soft spot in my heart for dudes that are at the cornerback position and willing to put their nose and be supportive in the run game too. So Cooper DeJean has some of that too, where I think he'll be able to show out that too when he shows up and starts doing testing. So yeah, it's tough, man. It's a tough spot. Like same thing. The Eagles were a tough one. Like, man, I could see them going corner for sure if they have a good grade on one of these guys, but they also how long does Lane Johnson play? They have some interior offensive line questions going on this year. Guyton's a big dude. Can he swing into a guard position for a year? I'm not sure about that, but I could see them going either offensive line. A bunch of these teams just offensive line, corner, edge rusher, and there's a bunch available. Receiver.
Yeah, hopefully free agency helps us clear up some of this. Scott, any last minute notes here on kind of the back half of the draft?
Yeah, I think one of the important things, especially with Philadelphia right there, is you talk about Vic Fangio and his connection there with Philadelphia. And then you talk about some of the players that are hitting free agency. Xavier Howard specifically is one of the guys I think they could target, who'll be familiar with the system and what they want to run over there. You talked about Kamari Lassiter. The team that showed the most interest in him at the combine, surprisingly, was Buffalo, who just cut Tre'Davious White. So that's another connection there that you can start to lean in on and start to look at. But look, there's going to be a lot of movement here, especially with a lot of these cuts that you saw here recently over the last couple of days and free agency. I think that lens will start to get more in focus over the next week. And we've got free agency, I think, officially starts on March 13th. I don't know what the actual tampering period or whatever when they can start doing. I know they can start talking to him a little bit earlier, but I think you're going to see some of these trades. I think Cousins is going to be the first domino to fall, and shortly after that you'll see Fields, and that's when the real action is going to start, and you're going to start to see some of these teams and some of these picks start making a lot more sense. And even here on the back end, the one team I want to hit on real quick is Pittsburgh. They're at 20.
Yeah.
I know that they're going to go ahead and entertain Russell Wilson. And, I think he's going to be able to basically come in at like a vet minimum. But what I've heard is that they're willing to give Kenny Pickett, one more year and to figure out. And specifically, like Pittsburgh's one of the teams look, they get their draft picks leaked very, very early every year. The two people that I have heard consistently linked to Pittsburgh is Amarius Mims, who you have there at 20 out of Georgia. They would love for him to go ahead and play that right tackle spot. And then the other player that I hear is very high on their board, going all the way back to the Senior Bowl, is Quinyon Mitchell. I heard that they have him as the top cornerback on their board. I think the two cornerbacks you have here early, Terrion Arnold and Quinyon Mitchell, are going to be the ones that are going to be the top two off the board. I think you're going to have some movement there in that 3 to 5, 3 to 6 position at cornerback. But specifically, those two players to Pittsburgh are ones that I think you need to pay attention to and can maybe start to get penciled into a lot of these mock drafts.
Yeah, putting Georgia Bulldogs on your ends after trading up last year and drafting Broderick Jones, who had a decent season. They're tough too. They're another team where I was back and forth with look, they hit a home run with Joey Porter Jr. in the second round last year. The offensive line, part of it last year was oh yeah, they had continuity. They're bringing everyone back, but not everyone. No one's really good. Dan Moore played almost 600 snaps last year, and out of all the tackles in the league, there was 58 tackles, I think. They played at least 50% of their snaps. He had the worst PFF grade of all the tackles. So they need to address the position, even though they added Jones last year. I don't think that takes them out of the mix for a tackle. And yeah, Mims makes a ton of sense. A mountain of a man who ran really fast for a dude that is just absolutely ginormous. So my Mims offensive tackle 1 dream is dying at 30-1, but the dude's going to be, he's a freak athlete. I think there's a lot of projection there still, but yeah, I think that he makes a lot of sense. So good to hear. So that's why we got Scott here. So, all right, gentlemen, any other questions, Connor, that you had from the chat?
Let's see here. We had mostly just Jeff talking shit about Chicago and the Bears. So it's always good. Love that he said that the Bears are going to script their first round pick. every year, so they're going to do it twice this year. I'm excited, man. I'm excited to bet the Bears to make the playoffs. You know, again, it looks like they're drafting Caleb Williams. Looks like they're going to get something for Justin Fields. As long as they pick a wide receiver, if they pick an offensive lineman, I don't know. I mean, it's not quite as much juice, but I kind of agree with you. I think they're kind of fun. So, especially if the Vikings are getting rid of Cousins, I mean, I think there's a lot more downside there than, what we're looking at.
Suddenly a 3 playoff team division with the Lions and Packers and Bears.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not like the Lions are infallible either. I mean, they won a lot of games, but it's, they're not quite as dominant as like, a San Francisco or anyone like that, in the division. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's kind of, I'm excited for this draft. I'm excited for, Chicago to maybe be good again, it'd be fun.
You can head over to 4for4.com and read my thoughts on each of these picks. You can also read the previous mocks by both Connor and Scott as well. You can head over to 4for4.com/plan, scoop the betting sub, and check out all the things that we have to offer for you for the 2024 season. Again, subscribe before you leave, thumbs up, rate and review on the podcast, all the things we appreciate. They go a long way. And we'll be back very soon to do it all again next week. So for Connor and Scott, I'm Ryan. We'll see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.